let me introduce myself a little bit. So I'm Dan. I'm married. My wife's in the back reporting you. Thank you. I've been working in marketing and growth and product teams for the last decade or so. I have expertise in website growth, website optimization, and acquiring new users for whatever you might be doing. And so today I want to talk about how you get more users and how you turn more of them into paying customers. That's kind of the idea. The idea of a conversion is somebody does something and becomes something different. Hopefully they drive revenue for you. There are three stories I'm going to tell today, kind of at different scales, right? Because I figure different people are in different places. I've worked for my aunt in some cases who has a small little business, and I've also worked for companies that are doing $100 million in revenue. Similar problems, similar solutions. And so some of them may be a little bit less applicable if you're not doing $100 million in revenue, but some of them might be more like my aunt, and that's okay too. All these are just a tool to solve a job. So I want to get started by just talking about what is conversion rate optimization. At its core, what that means is and especially in kind of the website context, people are visiting your website and you want them to do something, and they are or are not doing it. A conversion could be somebody visits your website and then fills out a form, right? They could purchase something. If you have an e-commerce shop, right? If you go to walmart.com and you buy something online, you've converted in their eyes. And that translates to revenue, or it translates to leads, or it translates to whatever you're trying to do. It's affiliate marketing, maybe it's reading your blog, whatever. And so the stories I'm going to tell you today are all about different businesses, different companies, and their problems, and how we used conversion rate optimization or experimentation to help solve these problems. Sound good so far? 2 enthusiastic thumbs up? I'll take one semi-enthusiastic thumbs up. I'm okay with even that. Okay. So the first company happens to be my aunt's company. She runs a business called Princess Parties by Natalie. And she runs hers in Utah, where I'm from, but there are businesses like this all over the place. Basically, she pays some young girls to dress up as princesses and go to other younger girls' birthday parties, right? And she runs most of her business through her website. That my wife actually built. So shout out to my wife back there. So the whole idea is you go online, and maybe your kid went to a party where there was a princess, they had a great time, and you go, cool, I want to order, have a princess come to my party and kind of run and host the party. A little bit of party planner, a little bit of entertainment. One of the problems that she had, though, here's some details about her. She's doing less than $100,000 in revenue a year. She basically runs the business by herself with a couple of contractors for princesses, and kind of located in Utah. So there you go. One of the problems that she has is something that they were just talking about, and that is she wanted to raise her prices. Inflation's killing us all. But she was nervous that raising her prices would result in fewer people purchasing her product, ordering her princess, right? Anybody who's selling anything has this constant battle of how much should I sell it for, and how do I know? So the problem was, I want to raise my prices. I don't want to lose any money by doing that, right? So this is example one of how we use experimentation, conversion rate optimization to help solve this problem. And that was, we devised a test. First, we start with a hypothesis, which is, does anybody know, this is back to science, right? So a hypothesis is generally an if-then statement. If something, then something else, right? If we raise prices for 50% of our audience, then there will be no change in the number of sales. That's the best case scenario, because we want sales to remain steady or potentially increase, but if we're raising prices, that seems unlikely. But regardless, it's stable, it's no change, right? So our if is, we raise the prices for 50% of the audience, then sales will be the same, right? So hopefully you're already seeing a little bit of analog here with some e-commerce kind of vibe, something you might be already involved with. So we set up and ran this test. We used a tool called Visual Website Optimizer, VWO. They have paid versions, but this version we used was free because I was working for her for free and she didn't want to pay for anything. I was great, we can make that work. So there's a tool that's very plug and play. There's a plugin, or you can insert some code on your site. Both are super easy options, and the testing tool does most of the work for you. Basically, all we're going to tell the testing tool to do is, hey, anytime somebody visits your website, take 50% of that audience and give them one experience, and take the other 50% and give them another experience. By doing this, we can measure what the 50% of each audience does. Do they still purchase? Do they not purchase? So far, so good. Everybody with me? Half enthusiastic thumb up? All right, cool, I like it. The only change we made in this case was we changed the price. The price used to be $119, and we raised it $6. I thought that was way too low. She was too nervous to do anything else. We landed on $125, so it's a $6 increase, not very much. But But you can see nothing is changing except for those two prices, right? And that's important because when you're doing a test, you want to isolate as many variables as possible, meaning if I changed the whole landing page, if I change the buttons, if I change a bunch of things, and then I get an outcome, I won't necessarily be able to isolate what change caused that outcome. Does that make sense? So when you're doing a test, one thing, you have what's called an overall evaluation criteria, an OEC, or I just call it a success metric if you're boring. And we basically just want to know, of these two prices, which button got clicked the most? Her process is still a little bit manual. You have to call on the phone, and it's harder to measure a phone call. And so this was as close as we could get in this scenario to having actual reliable data. So that's what we did. The result was, surprise, there was no change. What you'll see is version 1, which is the $119 price, had a 13.32% conversion rate. And version 2 also had a 13.32% conversion rate, which is exactly what we want. Total best case scenario. That means that the same number of people, percentage-wise, were converting on the higher price than the lower price. So we could tell, to a almost statistically significant degree, that raising her prices would have basically no effect on her business, except that she would be generating more money and still be booking the same number of parties. So this is a great example of a huge win you can have from a simple test, because maybe you want to raise your prices for any of the services or products that you offer, but you're not sure either one, what the right price should be, or two, how to kind of get to that point. Running a simple test is a great way to validate this is a good idea, or hey, we saw a huge dip in sales, maybe that's not a good idea. You can start to gather information and learn what should your price be for the product or service. Test number 2. For those of you who are writing blogs, this is going to be a little more relevant. Another company that I worked for is called Lendio. They are bigger. Here's their site. They're all about connecting small businesses with loans. Say you live here in New York and your business needs a loan, but the interest rates are terrible. Maybe in Florida, they're awesome. They would connect you with those better interest rates. A little bit of a profile. They were doing about $90 million a year, pretty solid, much bigger of a company. And despite their company size being bigger than yours, I think the problem that they had will resonate with everybody of all sizes, especially if you're in that blog space. So Lendio's blog getting a ton of traffic, which is awesome. But the problem is that none of the traffic is converting. What that means is people are visiting the blog and then leaving. They're taking no further actions. They're not checking an email. They're not purchasing a product. They're not getting into anything. Just nothing is happening, right? And we could see this through our Google Analytics or through any other analytics platform you're using, where you go in and you say, hey, great, this page has 10,000 views and the people are on the page for 3 minutes. That's awesome. This content must be really valuable. But then you can look at what's called the average pages per session, or pages per session. And for this particular example, they were at like 1.06. They were seeing one page and then leaving. So there are a couple of problems with that. One, users are just not engaging. The content's valuable, but nobody's doing anything with it. And so we need to figure out how to solve that. So there were actually 2 hypotheses that we developed for this. One, if we put a button more prominently through the content, higher up on the page, that we'll get more clicks, right? And so this is sort of proving like maybe it's just the design of the blog is not good. Maybe there's just something about this is not getting people to take any further action. So if we make it really clear what a reader should do, maybe they'll do that. That first hypothesis kind of led us to our next hypothesis, which is if they're going to click a button and it just goes right to a place where they can convert, in this case, they're going to go fill out a form. What if instead of directing them directly to a place where they filled out a form, we put a button in the same spot, but we took them to another blog post that was related to the first blog post? So ideally, we're increasing the engagement, and then on that second blog post, there's a button that takes you to the form. So you have blog post to form for our first variant, and then blog post to form for our second. The second one, if it worked, basically proving that getting people to read more content is better for conversion. So that's exactly what we did. Here's the tools we used. Adobe Target. It's a very expensive tool. I didn't pay for it, but it's fantastic. BWO can do a lot of it. Adobe Target's pretty intense, but it's what we use. Just for reference. So here's our control. We ended up doing a control in 2 variables. This is an example of a blog post, and you'll see there's no button beneath the featured image there. That's sort of indicative of the crummy UI, right? When you get to this page, there are some buttons, there's some other blogs, but it's kind of crowded, and it's not super clear what a user should do once they get to this page. So for our first variant, we just added a button right below the featured image. Right there, just, hey, here's one thing we think you should do. Really plain, really simple, just go click this button. It's one of my rules of the internet. If you put a button, people will click the button. Like, it's just, I don't know why people click buttons, that's what they do. Variant 2 was slightly different. Like I said, this is going to go to another blog post that is related to this blog post. And on that blog post is another button that looks like this, where we say, hey, go convert now. So blog post conversion, blog post conversion. The idea being more engagement, more reading, more time on the site is more likely to convert. And that is exactly what we found. This was really interesting because we did see that the first version, where it was blog post to conversion, did convert, meaning if we made it really clear what you should do, you did it. People clicked on buttons, they filled out forms, and we saw a much higher conversion rate, meaning people did go and fill out that form. So the variant A had a 2.14% increase in conversions, but the average lift was low, meaning people filled out the form, but less people actually purchased at the end of the process. So that was interesting. So we did get people to fill out the form, but they weren't ready to actually do something. We weren't generating any revenue from it. So they were good. We were improving that metric, but also sort of superficially, if that makes any sense. The second metric is where we really see significant success. We saw a very strong increase in conversion rate, meaning people read both blog posts and then went to the form and filled out the form. And then we saw an 11% conversion, meaning people filled out the form and actually gave us revenue, right? People bought the product or whatever it was, kind of the loan. That's how they drive their revenue. So what we saw is that by driving people to multiple blog posts and then encouraging them to convert, we were able to get a much higher conversion rate and also tie that to revenue in the end. Does that make sense? Is that crazy? So the takeaway is my rule for the internet. Users click on buttons, which is good. If you make it really clear what your users should do on your blog, on your website, wherever you are, they'll likely do it. At least some percentage will. The average conversion rate on the internet is somewhere between 2 and 5%, just given various factors. Some industries convert better, some convert worse. But if you make it clear what a user should do, they will do it. They'll click a button. I don't know why we like to click buttons, but we like to click buttons. So, 2, when users engage with more content, they're more likely to trust your brand, your content, and convert. That tracks, right? 3, good UI and CTAs, calls to action, through your blog can lead to more revenue. I don't want to say will, but it can. It's absolutely a contributing factor because you're encouraging your users, telling them what they should be doing. Make sense? Any questions, comments, concerns, fears, phobias? Somebody's got to be afraid of snakes. I just don't believe you're not. Cool. My last example is Route. Route was a company that I worked for that we were starting to build out their experimentation program. They were a tech startup. I joined when they had been about 2 or 3 years old, so very new. Helping them to build their website. And then we were trying to figure out how do we get this website to do what we want it to do, right? That's really interesting in that you may or may not have seen it. They have 2 sides of the business. They have the B2C side, business to consumer side, what we call the B2C's shoppers. And there's an app where you can buy something from any vendor and you can track that package on the app. If you buy something on Amazon, you can always track the package. You can't necessarily if you buy from Nike or from Wagon, whatever, some other small business, right? And so Route enables B2C shoppers to track that package and then also to show it. It also has a B2B component where if you run or operate an e-commerce store, you can offer package protection, like insurance basically, and tracking. So if you've ever bought ice cream or clothes and it's hey, do you want to insure this package for $2 or whatever at the checkout? That's what Route does. So they had 2 sides of the business. Here's some stats about them. They were doing about $100 million a year, 200 to 500 employees, lots of funding. It was a real wild ride, very tech startup kind of vibe. When you think of crazy tech startup, it checks all those boxes, which was fun and insane at the same time. The really interesting problem that we had, though, was there were this is typical of companies that are B2B2C, meaning you have a product that faces both sides, so the consumer side and the business side. There are more consumers, usually, so there are merchant customers. So, think about, Uber. Uber has more people who use the Uber app than it does people who want to drive for Uber. It still has people who want to drive, but there are way, way more people who want a ride. Right? Does that make sense? And so the problem we were having is how do you build and design a website for those 2 very different audiences that want 2 very different things? Uber says some people want to ride, some people want to drive. So how do you build a website that will cater to both of those needs? One of the problems that Route was having is that the larger majority of B2C customers were filling out the forms that were meant for the B2B customers. Meaning all that information was going to the sales team. Sales team's getting on the phone with basically somebody who wants a ride and says, you've not reached the right place, right? It's bad for everybody. It's bad for our sales team, it's bad for our marketing team, and it's bad for the consumer side of the business who are trying to solve a problem or track a package or do something that they're trying to do. And so we tried to figure out how can we reduce the number of B2C people, or consumers, users, filling out this B2B merchant lead form? Does that make sense? Everybody with me on that? Basically, how do we improve the lead quality while also getting these other people to the right place so that everybody's experience is elevated? That's the big problem that we have. So, if we ask users, our hypothesis is if we ask users to tell us who they are and what they want, then we can redirect them to the right place. That sounds really simple, and it weirdly took us a long time to get there. This is a time where we're using Google Optimize and just WordPress and Google Analytics, so it was really very basic. Google Optimize is dead now. RIP, Google Optimize. WO was great. It would have done the exact same thing. So what we did is we just put a little button in front of the form. We hid the form behind this button and said, are you a merchant or are you a shopper? Merchant being B2B, shopper being B2C. And if you clicked on shopper, we then pulled you to a page that offered 5 different options. We knew that a couple of these, like this download the app, track a package, file a claim, and FAQs were pretty common, but I also put a little block for other, like, hey, maybe there's something that you want that I can identify, and you should tell me what that is. And so we basically just ran this for a little while and got people to tell us what they want. These buttons would take them to where they wanted to go, and this is like kind of a bulky way to do it. This isn't what we wanted to end up with, but it was a good way for me to start to collect some information about how do we design a process that's going to scratch their itch for them, right? What we found was kind of interesting. 46% of people wanted to track a package, 32% wanted to download the app. So my hypothesis was right on this particular example. Like I thought people wanted these 2 things. We were right. We didn't have a huge sample size, but it was pretty reflective in general. And very few clicked other things. So we're like, okay, great. Then we're pretty comfortable in saying, let's just redirect people to these 2 or 3 problems that they have. So that's what we did. We rolled out an experience where if you selected shopper, you would get file a claim, get help, and then download the app. Those are the 3 most common questions or intents that users identified on this other page. Right here, 1, 2, 3. And then if you identified as a merchant, you just got a normal form. And then we also added things like business email, right? Just a couple of little things semantically to kind of indicate if you don't have a business, this is not for you. If you are probably not a business owner, you go over here, right? And so by doing this, we were able to dramatically reduce the number of bad leads going to the sales team, improving the lead quality. I don't know if I have a slide about that. Oh, I have data for that. I forgot to have the slide. Anyway, believe me, it happened. So our big takeaways from all this are, 1, know your users. Testing and experimentation can help you identify what it is that your users want, right? I don't necessarily want to put a big pop-up to all of my users. Hey, tell me what you want. But for a small segment, occasionally, that can be really valuable information. And it doesn't have to be super obtrusive, right? 2, asking who you are and what you want can be an effective way to improve the experience altogether. Like, hey, just tell me what you want. I'll do it for you. Like, we want to meet you in the middle here, right? If I've got any kind of business, I want you to get what you want. So help me get you there. Does that make sense? And then 3, sometimes getting more and higher quality leads is a matter of better filtering. Right? We had pretty good leads that were coming through, but when you get 10,000 leads a day and 90% of them are not good, it's really hard to filter through them. So by getting these leads to basically self-segment themselves, tell us who you are and we'll put you in the right spot. We cleaned that up and got way better data. Does that make sense? With that, I'm about out of time. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.